Today's episode of Pastor with No Answers is sponsored by the band Wild Earth. They have a brand new album coming out this Friday, August the 11th, called Holy Fools. Let's check out a clip of this track called Be Still.
This is connection to it all. Lean in, let go. In my hands, my hands. Be still and know that I am. It won't be enough, won't be enough, won't be enough, no. So give it up, give it up, give it up. Be still and know that I am.
This song is called Be Still by Wild Earth. This Arizona indie rock band is releasing their sophomore full-length titled Holy Fools this Friday, August the 11th. This record merges, you heard it, a pop, experimental, alternative rock sound with ancient prayers, praises, and confessions and worship and experience of Christ. Go pick it up on iTunes or listen to the record on Apple Music, Spotify, or your favorite digital streaming source. You can also get all of this info and more by visiting wildearthmusic.com. Again, that's Be Still off of Wild Earth's new record, Holy Fools. Hey guys, Joey Svensson. Thanks for listening to Pastor with No Answers. I want to welcome Silas George and Michael Wilson as they are newest members of our patron Pastor with No Answers community. Thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. They join this community by going to pastorwithnoanswers.com. We have links to our Patreon page as well as all of our social media outlets. Would love for you to go there. If you have no plans to go there, then hey, head on over to iTunes and leave a rating for Pastor with No Answers. Or not. Either way, thanks for listening. And now, here's the Pastor with No Answers newest episode. All right, we have a quick Q&A session with Jack Hoey. I know just for a split second you got your hopes up thinking it was Jack Hoey the Greater, but unfortunately it's Jack Hoey the Lesser. I am sorry. We will try to get his father on here for a Q&A. But no, seriously, about 45 minutes ago, actually, I knew Jack was going to come on to talk about something else, and I was like, maybe let's give a Q&A a whirl. And y'all have already sent in some good questions, so thank you for that. First question, Jack, are churches running off inertia right now? And basically what they mean by that, because of a conversation we've had prior, I know what they're referring to is Chip Judd actually commented on the fact that he thinks very likely that the big church machine that we all see as Sunday morning megachurch, they are currently highly potentially running off of the inertia of success of 15, 20 years ago. So in other words, if you take a train and it's going down the track super quickly and you hit stop, it's not going to stop right away. So the success that we're having in church planting all the way to individual churches is greatly due to the success of the last few decades.
Yeah. Well, I think that's, yes, I think that's very true. One of the things that has been on my mind a lot the last several years is, so you take churches like Seacoast or Saddleback or Willow Creek. It's kind of these churches that were planted in the 80s. No one really calls them seeker sensitive anymore, but for lack of a better term, seeker friendly, seeker sensitive, whatever. And kind of their goal when they started, a lot of these guys had very similar goals. From Bill Hybels and Rick Warren to even Pastor Greg here at Seacoast, and kind of one of their goals was to get unchurched or de-churched people, and so in other words, people who either have no church background or they left the church because of bad experiences, or they kind of grew up in an oppressive and stifling church culture, to get those people into church. More specifically, at least originally, it kind of focused on the suburban areas, right? So looking at the suburbs and finding all of these people who weren't involved in church at all and getting them into the church. So fast forward like 25 years, the mid-2000s, the mid-aughts, if that's a thing they're called, I have no idea. I think you would have to say that by and large, they succeeded. Not that everyone in the suburbs went to church, but they made church acceptable and attractive for their target audience, right? The people that they were pursuing came, and they came in huge numbers. And so what they set out to do, they did. But here's to my mind one of the challenges is when you set yourself up essentially like a product, which a lot of evangelical megachurches did and do. You need to have a reason to exist. So once you've accomplished your goal, why do you exist anymore? People go to church. Church isn't really that off-putting and scary and unknown for a lot of people, right? Like the idea of going to church isn't quite as weird as it was. It's not that difficult to invite people to church, I think, and it's just more accessible. Maybe that's what I'm really trying to say. It's more accessible than it was. So what do you do now? Well, I think that the world is a very different place than it was 15, 20 years ago, right? Like we live in very serious times. And I think that the kind of like what Chip was saying, the big box, big show church culture, I'm just not convinced that it has a place in the future. Now, whether that future is 50 years from now or 5 years from now, I don't know. But I think he's right in the sense of what got us here is not a reason for existing in the future.
Yes. So, Mr. Hybels, Mr. Warren, you've heard Jack.
Oh,
you did a great job. Job well done. Your goal has been met. Now stop it. Stop. That's what Jack is.
Wow. That's one interpretation of what just happened. Well,
I think I'm messing with you. I'm messing.
Yeah, no,
I know that's not what you're saying, and I think that's articulated very well. Gosh, they really did do a great job. I mean, I think
the challenge is.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. The challenge is I don't necessarily know what I'm saying in the sense of I don't know what's next. I'm not sitting here saying I have the answer for what we need to do. That's one of the reasons that I wanted to come on staff at Seacoast was to help us figure out what does it mean to move into the future. What does it mean to be a church in our culture in a time when the entire world is undergoing seismic shifts. The world is changing to a degree that has not been seen in a very, very, very long time. And we don't know what that means. It's not like we know how it's changing. We don't know what the world is going to be like, and we don't understand all of the changes that are happening. And it's also very rare it's very rare to be aware that you're living through one of those times. Usually when people live through big periods of change, they don't necessarily know it. And I'm not saying that this is like fall of Rome type stuff, but kind of in the degree to which the entire world is changing, and it's changing fast. And I don't know what's coming next, but I agree with Chip, and I've long agreed with the idea that you cannot take what got you here for granted. It is not enough, and maybe it needs to die, and I would be fine with that. Things are supposed to die, and nothing is in this world supposed to live forever.
Cool. Well, thank you, Charles Longo, for that question. Now we have Josh Whippy. I think I said your name right. Sorry if I mispronounced it again. You've actually been on this podcast, so I apologize. Not that matters. Shoot, you can come on this podcast. I'll still mispronounce your name. There. But anyway, he wants to know thoughts on open theism. What are your thoughts?
Geez.
And let's this could go on forever. So how probable do you think it is just in your mind, and what are some problems that it presents when we entertain it?
Well, I mean, the probability thing is well, goodness. I mean, the God of open theism has about as much a chance as I do as answering that question correctly.
Why don't you explain it real quick, a snapshot for someone who's never heard that terminology? I mean, it's basically that God can make mistakes and he doesn't know everything. I mean, is that basically what it boils down to?
So open theism is an attempt to reconcile the idea that God is on. It's an attempt to reconcile a few things. The big one is, if God knows everything, one, how does free will exist? But two, if God knows everything, how can we reconcile suffering with the idea that he is loving? And so it's basically an attempt to reconcile this idea. How can God be all-knowing if all of these problems, free will, suffering, that sort of thing?
Yeah, all-powerful and all-loving. It doesn't seem like both of those would be the case, correct?
Well, and open theism says they're not if God really is omnipotent. And so what open theism says is that God doesn't know the future. Now let me put it this way: open theism might be different than it was. I really studied it in depth about 10 years ago, and so I don't know. Maybe it's shifted a little bit. I'm not sure. But when I studied it, it was basically this idea that God doesn't know the future. What he does, he basically has. He's basically just the smartest guy in the universe, and he can guess with remarkable precision what will happen, and he can guide things to achieve what he wants, but he's not omnipotent, or he's not omniscient.
Yeah. I mean, how do you reconcile, if God knows the future perfectly, then how do we have free will? Like, are those things compatible? Like, can we have free will and God sees into the future, or if he knows everything, he has to be somewhat involved?
Well, I mean, in some ways, that's just a question that I think we're incapable of resolving to our satisfaction. But I mean, here's what I would say. Just to sort of, keep it brief, is that the Bible is very clear about two things. One is that God knows everything. One of my favorite passages is from Isaiah 46. And it says that, I am God and there is none like me, who declare the end from the beginning. In other words, he knows everything, and he is able to tell us what will happen. He's not able to tell us what he thinks will happen. He's able to tell us what will happen, because God doesn't exist within time. God exists out of time. God is experiencing all of time at once. And so so what that means is that he is just as present right now here with you and me as he is with Moses, right? For God, both of those things are happening. The way we would understand it is both those things are happening at once, right? God is with us and with Moses thousands of years ago at the same time.
That's crazy.
He experiences all at once. And what that means is, and just to throw this in here just because I love this idea, what that means is that he experiences all of our worship at once. So when we worship God, when we lift our voices in song and we worship him, we are joining in with every believer who has ever worshiped him, because he experiences that all at once.
That's insane. But that means he hears all of our prayers at once too, and it gives him like a headache.
Yeah, well, some prayers.
That's
I'm
true.
Sure.
That's true. Do you think that when I die, I look around and my grandfather just got there too? And I was like, wait a second, you just got here? And you died in 93. And he said, what happened to you? I died. How did you get so old? You were 16 when I died. Like, do you think we all get there at the same time?
Well, I mean, I've heard that, and there's sort of the idea that, right, like if there's no time and eternity, that like in a sense we all get there at the same time, which is a pretty neat idea. But it's a little bit unknowable. But it's like I get, to me that makes sense. But man, who knows? But yeah, I think about your death all the time, Joey.
Yeah.
All the
well, I mean,
time.
it would just be very impactful on the world when I go. So I appreciate you. More people need to do that. Thank you, Jack. All right.
No problem.
Danielle Reed wants to know if you've ever witnessed a miracle.
Oh, well, hold on. With open theism, because we talked about what it is. But let me just really quickly wrap up.
That's right.
It's to me, it's what's the point? Like, I don't even understand what the point of affirming something like that is. Like, yeah, you solve your problems and you create 1,000 worse ones. So now your God is basically this guy who is barely better. I mean, here's the deal. If open theism is true, then your God is Bill Murray from Groundhog Day.
Oh my gosh.
Because remember the line from Groundhog Day where it's like, maybe God is just, maybe he knows everything because he's been around for so long, right? And someone asked the director, like, so how long was he in ground? Like, how long was he living that day over and over? And he said, in original scripts, he had him experience that day for 10,000 years. and I can't remember what it ended up being. I think it was like 10 years or something, right? Like, so in the movie, it's like by the end of it, he had lived that day for 10 years. But that's like the idea of Groundhog Day. Like, the reason that Bill Murray by the end of the movie is able to save the kid from the tree and, like, help a couple get back together when they're about to break up and do all those things is because he's lived that day over and over. And to me, that's the god of open theism, is Bill Murray from Groundhog Day, right? He just knows a lot, and that's why he's God, because he knows a lot of things. He doesn't know everything. He just knows a lot of things.
Do you know if there's any open theists that believe, our fingers need to be crossed, Satan may win this one, or they all are pretty convinced that God's got enough power to figure that one out?
I can't speak to that one specifically because as you said, I'm like, gosh, I don't really know a whole lot about what they believe about that dynamic, with Satan and evil. Yeah, I can't really speak to that part.
All right. Have you witnessed a miracle?
I mean, who knows?
Do you think you have?
No.
Okay. Sweet.
No.
Good enough.
But it's like, in terms of the way I would define miracle, right? Like, some people, and this is probably just like the way people use language. Some people like to use miracle when they mean something amazing. And to me, so when I say no, I haven't experienced a miracle, or witnessed a miracle rather, what I mean is I have not, to my knowledge, witnessed a suspension of the natural laws. Right, because that's what a miracle is. It is the suspension or overriding of natural law.
Gotcha. Cool. Eric Jones wants to know, and I'm pretty sure I know what you're going to say. You can make it short and sweet. Do you think a literal reading of Genesis 1 and 2 is critical to your faith?
No. It hasn't been for tremendous numbers of Christians and Jews, down through the ages. A reading of Genesis that, weaves sort of, and that's not to say that none of it is literally true, right? Like, doesn't have to be an either or, but it is clearly poetry, and it is clearly telling a story using poetry as a medium. And to me, that, like, what is the writer doing? What is Moses? And I think Moses wrote it, so it's not like I'm, like full, like it was written by 1,000 people over 10 million years. I do think Moses wrote it. So what is Moses trying to do? We need to pay attention to that. And how is he trying to do it? Well, he's using poetry. Okay, why is he using poetry? What is he accomplishing with that? So no, it's a literal reading is not critical to my faith.
Gotcha. All right, Gregory Birmingham wants to know your thoughts and preferences in regards to evangelism. He said, basically, your thoughts on the Kirk Cameron, Ray Comfort style of evangelism. Do you even know what the heck he's talking about?
Well, I mean, probably not so much with Kirk Cameron. So, like, I heard Ray Comfort speak a few times in college when he came to Liberty. I'm a pastor, but I'm a pretty bad pastor. It's like I am never, for me, I've done street evangelism. I've done missions trips and I've delivered the gospel to people. And for me, I have never been let me tell you the gospel in 5 minutes and then ask you to make a decision. That's just never been something that I've been comfortable with, that has appealed to me. Now, that doesn't mean it's wrong. I mean, there's some people who are fantastic at that, who are very charismatic and very persuasive, and that is like they love proclaiming and demanding that people have a response. And I don't have a problem with that. For me, we're to witness. Bear witness to the gospel in everything that we do, in our actions and our thoughts and in our words, in the way that we treat people. And so, for me, however we evangelize, we need to be incorporating all of those things. And you're going to do it in different ways. People are going to emphasize different parts just because people are different. And so, for me, I enjoy having blunt conversations with people that trust me, or strangers who just want to pick my brain, right? Like that's kind of one of my deals is when I talk to people about Christianity and their questions, I kind of always start off, if it's my first time sitting down with them, I always start off with like, listen, let me tell you something. I'm going to be blunt with you because I respect you, right? I'm not going to sugarcoat things, and it's not saying rude, but I'm just going to tell you what I think. And like, are you okay with that? And because I would want you to do the same to me. And so it's not that I sugarcoat things or I try to go at it in a really oblique fashion. It's just, to me, I don't know. I guess, and maybe it's a cultural thing too. But for me, the gospel is about personal connection, and it's about extending love towards people, and I just think in our culture right now, kind of proclaiming it at people just isn't really an effective thing. And so for me, it's sort of within that context of trust and within that context of one-on-one authenticity that I feel like I can really make a persuasive case for why I believe and why I think that other people should believe.
Yeah. How would you answer the question, does God need us to spread the good news?
I mean, well, so God doesn't need us to do anything. But on the other hand, like, we're the ones he's chosen. And so to me, I guess the word need is not helpful for me. God has chosen to use people to spread his message. And so we're the ones that have to do it. And if we don't do it, he'll find someone else who will.
Fair enough. All right, so this is the last question, and it's coming from yours truly. I have heard people...
Okay, I know where you're going with this, Shay. I know where they're going with this. So you always want to watch anime in the original Japanese. I know that involves reading, but it's just better that way. And I would start with Full Metal Alchemist. I think that's probably the most natural introduction to the medium and genre. You're looking at me like you were going to ask something different. This is not about anime.
I've actually never if someone said describe anime, I'd be like, I just don't even know where to start. I don't even know what it is. It's like, was it Asian cartoons?
Wow. Asian cartoons. Wow. Well, I'm going to have to contact the Japanese embassy and issue an apology.
I'm so glad that you think that this podcast is that powerful. Awesome. So I have heard people that still consider themselves within the Christian community, but they do not believe that Jesus giving his life up was necessary for us to have a relationship with God. So in other words, they find it a very silly notion that God had to send God to make God happy with us again. And so it seems as if, and this is just how I was brought up, that the whole penal substitution is what makes Christianity Christianity. So I guess, and obviously this is a very complicated question, but do you think that there's room, like you and I would both agree that there's room for Christians in the church that don't believe in inerrancy? In fact, it's kind of silly for them not to have a voice. But sure. How about Christians that say, yeah, I believe in the crucifixion and resurrection, but it wasn't for me. God didn't have to do that for me to be saved. Like, that wasn't necessary.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So there have been a few people, I think, in the last few months, I've seen some things online. I think Michael Gungor was one who was sort of talking about penal substitution and kind of some of his problems with the idea that I think the way he put something like, the idea that blood sacrifice was required is, the idea was like it's kind of a brutal idea and not helpful for us today. And part of it, like when I read, again, it's sort of like part of me when I read people say like, it doesn't make any sense that God would do this. Like, well, who cares what you think? Like that has nothing to do with anything, right? Like that's like when someone from a neighborhood turns out to be a serial killer and people are like, but he was so quiet. I can't imagine him doing that. It's like, well, he did it. It's like what you believe about that person, what you imagined, what you could fathom has nothing to do with reality. Or at least reality is not dependent on what you are capable of imagining. And so it's like, but at the same time, that doesn't mean those instincts aren't doesn't mean you shouldn't pay attention to those instincts. You should. It's that when people are like, I can't imagine why penal substitution is good, therefore I'm rejecting it. It's like, well, it's like, slow down, cowboy. Maybe interact with those thoughts a little bit. And so, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. So for me, it's difficult for me. One of the reasons I've had a really hard time following these discussions on Twitter and elsewhere. Again, sometimes I'm not even sure what some of the complaints are. And I don't know if that's because I'm failing at reading comprehension. I don't know if that's because they're not being clear. But it occurred to me, I might have a hard time understanding what they're talking about because, kind of like you said, for me, penal substitution, the idea that Christ was punished on my behalf for sin, that is basically the Christianity I grew up with in some form or fashion. And so for me, it's again, it's kind of like finding out that, this thing you always assumed isn't true. It's like, it's hard for me to wrap my brain around that. Not in the sense of like, but if that's not true, then everything has changed. It's more like, it's kind of like learning a different language, if that makes sense. I just don't even, it's hard for me to even interact with the ideas that they're saying because I'm not sure what they're trying to say. So on one hand, there's the idea of I can't, a God who would murder his son to satisfy his own bloodlust is evil. It's like, well, yeah, it is. I'm sure glad that's not what Christianity is, because that sounds awful. Because it's not what Christianity is. And I think one of the things that some of them do is they make sort of a distinction between God and Jesus, and like, oh, God murdered some poor kid because he couldn't bear to fix it like an adult. That's like, I don't even know what that means. What are you talking about? The incarnation, the idea that God loved us enough to become one of us and to himself deal with the repercussions of our actions. That is what the incarnation is about. That is what, the cross is about. It's the idea that God loved people so much that he was willing to do whatever it took to deal with sin. Now, whether you think that is the idea that some transaction needed to be made where sin had a cost of X and the cross fulfilled that cost, paid that debt, or whether you think that, sort of this Christus Victor, and gosh, I'm going to mangle this, but this idea that sin, what the cross did was break evil's hold on the world, right? So whatever you believe about that, like, there are a lot of different interpretations of what the cross means and what the cross accomplished, and a lot of those are perfectly fine and able to interact with each other. But it's sort of this idea that, like, I think a lot of the complaints of penal substitution don't really understand it. So, yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So, I mean, you definitely believe, I mean, this is kind of where I land with this, is our minds can't grasp it, but they're like, almost like, hey, if you want to make this water turn into ice, then you don't have a whole lot of options. You need to figure out how to get it at that sort of temperature so that can happen. So that's science. So I almost see the atonement as almost like a spiritual science. Like, we don't understand why it was necessary, but it absolutely was necessary. Like, we could not go to heaven, and who knows why. Well, maybe it has something to do with the very nature of God, and that was just the only way for it to happen. But I guess I'd have to say that's what I believe. I believe that was the only way for me to be able to be with God forever and ever. I mean, is that kind of where you stand?
Yeah, well, it's sort of like one idea that I've seen, and I'm not sure if Michael Gungor makes this explicit idea, but it's sort of the idea of why couldn't, the idea the idea that Jesus had to die is barbaric. God could have just dealt with it another way. It's like, okay, I'm not sure who you are to know that. I mean, that's amazing that you know that. But I think part of the deal is that kind of like you said. So occasionally, one of my boys will bring me a toy that he has been a little too rough with, and like so there's something broken. He asks me to fix it, and sometimes I can fix it, and sometimes I have to say, buddy, it's broken. I can't fix it. I can't. And I think that this idea that why couldn't God just fix it? It's like to me, it's a very childish way of dealing with it's like the people. These are like the same people that say, I can't imagine a God who would murder innocent babies, are the same people who's like, why couldn't he just fix sin? It's like, so on the one hand, the world is inexplicably horrifying and suffering is immense, and on the other hand, you want God to just fix things, like and I guess that's a bit of a straw man. I don't know that I've seen one person express both of those beliefs, but to me, it's like that is people. I guess what I'm saying is, to me, like those are two sides of the same coin, right? It's that I can't believe a God who would allow this, and on the other side, I can't. On the other hand, you have this idea that I can't believe in a God who wouldn't just fix things. It's like, well, that's a very childish way to. It's a very childish expectation to have, because things break, and when they break, they're broken, and putting them together again isn't the same as if they were bent or scuffed. A few years ago I had so there's a passage in Matthew where it was where Jesus is talking about divorce, and he talks about the idea that if anyone divorces for any reason except for adultery, but in some I think in the Matthew passage it's just like for any reason, no divorce period. And if you marry a divorced person, or if two divorced people marry, they're committing adultery, because divorce is not acceptable. And so one of the questions I got one time a few years ago was, well, I'm engaged to a guy, and we were both divorced. So does that mean that if we get married, we would be sinning? And so I don't want to go into the whole response, but one of the things I pointed out was, because that seems very harsh, right? Especially in a culture where divorce is all over the place. But it seems very harsh. One of my responses was, listen, you can make decisions that put yourself in a place where there are no good choices left. You can get yourself into a situation where there are no good choices, right? Where the only choices are going to cause pain, where the only solution to problems is going to be someone getting hurt, right? Because there are no good solutions. You can get yourself into a position where violence is inevitable, where violence is unavoidable, and
like the lesser of the, so you have to pick the lesser of the two evils, sort of thing.
Yeah, but again, but to me, the overarching point is all you're left with is evil, and because that's what sin is, and that's what humans are like, and so I think we want to look for, there must be a way out, and sometimes there's not, right? Sometimes you are left with no good options, and people are going to get hurt because you have sinned, because you have acted selfishly, whatever the reason. And so for me, if sin has really damaged humanity, if sin has really wreaked havoc on creation, then at some point, how do you deal with sin? And this idea that there's this perfect, easy rainbows and unicorns option that God he could have done but didn't, to me that is just so childish and so ridiculous. And I know that I'm not saying that all objections to penal substitution are like that, but some of the ones I've seen basically boil down to God. Why couldn't God have just fixed it? Because you're not 6, and it's the world is the way it is, and sin is awful. Sin is awful and destructive, and it kills. And to my mind, of course there was going to be a death, right? Of course sin was going to end with someone dying, because it had been killing people for thousands of years. And the beauty of the gospel is that Jesus kills death, right? It's not that he dies this victim's death and it's terribly sad. It's that the greatest moment, the greatest display of Christ's power was him on the cross. Right? Totally vulnerable, giving himself up. And in that moment, he deals with sin. And the way he does it is to basically, accept all of this horrible stuff and and just take it all upon himself. And he's the only one who could. Yeah.
Jack, let me point out a gift that you have. You have a gift of basically explaining things very eloquently and clearly and making people feel like they're stupid idiots, but not coming across arrogant because of how you carry yourself throughout the conversation. It's like you throw in like one-liners, and for a split second, they're like, did he just call me an idiot? But then you keep talking, they're like, nah, he's
That's my trick. I keep talking. And at some point you forget all the other stuff I said. You're like, I don't know anything he said, but he's done talking, so I can leave now.
There you go. Well, Jack, thanks for the answers, because you know what this podcast is called. It's the Pastor with No Answers. So I don't have this kind of stuff to offer people, so I have to bring people like you to deliver some answers. So thank you.
Wow. Well, you're welcome. You're welcome.